Well, good morning. So glad you're with us. Just one more thing, just in case you miss anything during the promotions, they are all on the back of the worship guide. So I hope you got one of those. If you didn't get one on the way in, grab one on the way out. And that way you'll know exactly what is going on here in the life of New Hope Church. We're so glad you've joined us. I'm Pastor Paul. We're in our 5-week series of On Purpose, or a year of purpose. This morning we're going to look at the second purpose. Now, they're not in any particular order. Last week we looked at worship. This week we're going to look at ministry. We spent some time last week. Someone said to me through the week, he said, you managed to squeeze 3 sermons into 1 week. How did you do that? And I said, quickly. Just kept going. Just don't stop. Don't take a breath, nothing. Just keep moving. But we looked at this idea of, we laid the foundation last week of what the 5 purposes are. So the worship, ministry, fellowship, discipleship, evangelism or mission. We unpacked those. Then we also talked about the connection that prayer plays in that. And we touched base with this idea of the month of February going to be our month of prayer and fasting. And we want to pray, as Julie so eloquently reflected in her prayer, for our next senior pastor. We want to be praying for our current pastor search team as they go through all the candidate listings, as they go through all of the CVs and resumes. And we also want to continue to pray for our boards and the rest of our staff as we keep the church moving forward during this interim period. Now, I have a question for you. For those of you who have chosen to fast, how you doing? How you doing with that? Working on it. Yeah, good. Jonathan came up to me through the week, and it was an FA Cup game, which is Football Association soccer, and he goes, Dad, watch this. It was Manchester United versus Middlesbrough. And I said, I can't watch it. And he goes, why not? And I said, because I'm fasting from watching soccer. And he goes, what? He goes, what? He couldn't understand, just couldn't resonate with this idea of not watching soccer. I've watched soccer, played soccer all of my life. If I could be out there now, I would. My body just won't allow it. Unfortunately, my joints just don't work. All right. And then what we did, the third part of our 3-act play, if you will, last week was looking at the first purpose that we wanted to unpack, and that was the purpose of worship. And there were 4 points that we looked at from that. The first one was that we delight in God. God delights in us. God draws near to us, and God ministers to us. This is all part of this idea of worship. Now, worship is so much more than just the songs we sing, and I think we all know that, don't we? And I'm hoping that those that are joining us online and will be watching on demand later will probably have that same understanding that it's a lifestyle. Worship is about our everyday. Well, we're about to launch into the second of those purposes today, and it's the purpose of ministry. But I want to suggest that they're very, very much intertwined. All of the purposes are intertwined, and you can't have one without the other. And that's why really our big idea from last week was this idea that they have to be perfectly balanced. And so we're going to unpack that. But I want to introduce something to you that you might have heard of before, and it's going to sort of set the foundation. And then we're going to launch into the first aspect of ministry, and that is this idea of the priesthood of all believers. Just shoot your hand up if you've heard of that before. All of those that have done Class 101 are probably familiar with this, but it's also something that is been going around the life of the Christian church for some time. It's basically that we all are ministers. And we're going to unpack this, but I wanted to lay that out there. The priesthood of all believers, which basically means we're all in the game. We've all got a shot at it. We've all got a role to play. And so hopefully by the end of this morning's message, you'll realize how this applies to you and how you can do that. All right. Romans 12. Now, by the way, before I read this, we're hanging out in Acts. That's our main passage for this series, Acts 2, 42 to 47. That's where you find those purposes. You'll see that. It's on the front of your worship guide, so you can have a look at that later. But we're going to now look at Romans 12 because I want to do something this morning, I want to show us a bridge that connects worship and ministry. So this is the Message translation. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. Now, so it doesn't matter if you're a linesman working for consumers, doesn't matter if you're a mechanic, doesn't matter if you're a teacher, doesn't matter if you're a stay-at-home mum or dad. Got to be up with the times. You know, there are stay-at-home dads. I did it for a while when we first moved to England. I was the house husband. Maddie used to make jokes. She goes, "You do the best washing, Dad. You're so organised. You've got everything washed, folded, and ready to be put away." And I thought, well, yeah, this is not what I'm called. But you got to do what you got to do, right? You got to do what you got to do. The fact is, doesn't matter, or whether you're in paid ministry, no matter what you do, no matter what your profession, no matter what your station in life, all of us are called to be ministers. That's the priesthood of all believers. We're all called to be ministers. We're all called to serve, which is another term for ministry. So let's have a look at this bridge. Let's join the dots. Let's connect the dots between worship and ministry. So as I said, last week's big idea was the fact that to achieve a healthy, flourishing church, all of the 5 purposes have to be balanced. Now let me tell you, it's a great idea, isn't it? But it's not just a great idea, it's a God idea. God instituted this. I mean, I guess if we sat down and a few of us sort of looked at Acts 2 and we went, yeah, well, you can pull this out. Maybe that was a great idea. Yeah, look at that, this and that. But the reality is it was a God idea. God brought forth the Word in the person of His Son and by the power of the Holy Spirit. And the Word speaks to us. It's not just a great idea, it's a God idea. Now, the translation that I read is the Message, but other translations of Romans 12:1, they talk about this idea of spiritual worship. Spiritual worship. And when you look at the original language when it comes to those 2 words, there's a couple of key thoughts that we could really unpack that are important. And they connect the idea of worship and ministry together. The first of those words, which is spiritual, can be translated as this idea of logic or reason. Logic or reason. So you could effectively, when you're reading Romans 12:1, that last little bit, you could read it as, which is your logical or reasonable worship. That's the word spiritual. The second word is worship. And that word can be translated as worship, but it also can be translated as ministry or service to God. So if we combine those 2 words together, spiritual worship, we get this idea that we could actually translate those last verses as which is your logical ministry or which is your reasonable service. Or could be some sort of combination of the 2. Do you see the connection that we're establishing here? Not only is worship something we do, we sing, we give, we spend time listening to the Word. That's all part of our worship, but it's also requiring us to act. It's requiring us to step out and be ministers, to be people of action. I've already said this, but I'm going to say it again. The purposes are intertwined. And as we desire a healthy, vibrant, and purposeful church, we have to make sure we recognize the connection. It's important that we understand how each of these purposes is connected. But it doesn't end there. It's not the finishing point. It's important that we recognize that we are all called to live in such a way that our very lives are acts of service. On the vertical and on the horizontal. We're serving God, we're serving each other. And the clearest way that that can be characterized is in ministry. Each one of us playing our part as a minister. And as I said, it could be in the factory. It could be in the schoolroom. It could be in the bank. It could be in the doctor's surgery. It could be at home. We're all required to be ministers. So Romans 12 is the bridge. Romans 12 is that connection. We see that worship and ministry are connected. So yes, and we read a number of verses, particularly David was good at this. He talked about lifting his eyes to the hills, worshipping God, being thankful, extolling God. And that is great. There is nothing wrong with that. But if we stop there, we're missing the point. We have to go further. We have to allow our lives to become very literally acts of service. We have to live out our worship. So Romans 12 is the bridge. We're going to look at Ephesians 4 next. And Ephesians 4 serves as the blueprint to help us understand our role in ministry. So in Ephesians 4 is written by the Apostle Paul. He wrote quite a large chunk of the New Testament. And he has a particular way of writing. And both the book of Romans and the book of Ephesians are written in such a way that helps us understand, not just from a mental reasoning, but also from a practical application. So he will teach what he wants them to understand, what he wants his hearers to learn. So in Rome, in Ephesus, he's writing to these people and he's saying, this is the truth. Here it is. This is undeniable. It's the truth that you need to adhere to in the Christian faith. But he doesn't stop there. He then goes on and says, right, this is how you live it out. And in Ephesians 4, we see this. We see the way that he unpacks what he said to them in the first 3 chapters in the book of Ephesians, how that should work out in their lives. And the application for the first century is the same as it is for us now. The reality is, Paul uses the metaphor of a body, and states that every member should be active in serving and in ministry. Every member should be active and serving in ministry. Because it's active members who result in a church being healthy, vibrant, and purposeful. That's how our church will continue to be all that it is. Through our active membership, through our active involvement, we are the markers of a healthy, vibrant, purposeful church. Let's have a look at Ephesians chapter 4. And we're jumping around in this, so there's a few different parts of it, but it's the first 13 verses, but I've selected some that just to make the point. In light of all this, here's what I want you to do. And this is Paul writing from prison. While I'm locked up here, a prisoner for the master, I want you to get out there and walk. Better yet, run. I like that. Better yet, run. Don't just walk, run. On the road God called you to travel. But that doesn't mean you should all look and speak and act the same. I love that. Could you imagine if everybody was like me? I heard the groan from my wife. For those that are watching online, you can't see her, but she's groaning about the fact that if everyone was like me, it's a real problem. But the reality is we're all different. And God's wired us differently. I'm not Kyle. I can't keep time. I couldn't play the drums. It would be a mess. But there's so much more to Kyle than even that. I'm not Hal. I'm not Eric. I'm not Scott. But without all of those people that I've just mentioned, we wouldn't be New Hope. We wouldn't be who we are without them. And here's one of the keys. Out of the generosity of Christ, each of us is given his own gift. He handed out gifts of apostle, prophet, evangelist, and pastor teacher to train Christ's followers in skilled servant work, working within Christ's body, the church, until we're all moving rhythmically and easily with each other, efficient and graceful in response to God's Son, fully mature adults, fully developed within and without, fully alive like Christ. Fully alive like Christ. It's a blueprint. And the unfortunate thing is, I think we've allowed this mindset to get into the church that the guy who gets paid is the guy that does all the work. So he's the evangelist, he's the pastor, he's the apostle, he's the teacher. But can I just say, that's not what this passage is saying. Yes, God gives gifts for these particular offices, and they are important in the life of the church. But there are a ton of other gifts throughout the Bible. Romans has gifts, Corinthians has gifts, and we all have a place and a part to play. We've become so caught up on this idea of the professional Christian. The guy who does everything. Well, the pastor he'll do the evangelism. He'll be down at the local, shopping mall or walking down doing Perchville, tasting chili, and he'll be the one talking to everybody and sundry about Jesus. I'll just do my thing. But that's not how this passage is meant to be read. Remember, ministry is a God idea. God established each and every one of us with gifts so that we can exercise our worship to Him through ministry. So Christ has a strategic plan. And that strategic plan for ministry is that every member of the body, that's you and I, would be able to serve each other for a series of purposes. And here are those purposes. 1, wholeness and health across the whole church. Wholeness and health across the whole church. That's why we are called to be members of the body. Secondly, because as we are ministers, as we serve, we strengthen the church. We strengthen the church in the areas of truth and confidence. And finally, we mobilize as a whole church. All of us working together. And that last point, this idea of mobilizing the whole church, is multifaceted because it involves care. It involves personal care for each and every one. The person sitting next to you, they need you to care for them. The people sitting in front of you, behind you, in a different section of the church, we all need each other to care for each other so that we can grow in our love for God and our love for each other. But it also requires us to be ministering people. It requires us to share our story, to be evangelists, to just tell the good news to people. And that looks like your story. It doesn't have to be a well-drafted message and something that really brings people. It doesn't have to have this emotive hook to it that says, yep, you have to make a decision at the end. It's you just telling what God has done in your life, who you were, who you are now, and who you're becoming. It's just sharing who you are in God. And that sowing of a seed, as we call it, is the way that people hear about God. And there may be no response the first time. But then someone else will do it. That person will bump into someone else. Or they'll have something happen in their life and someone will reach out and show love to them, care for them. Another seed sown. And over the course of time, the Holy Spirit will bring those people into relationship with God. In one of the translations, there's a phrase that says, to train Christ's followers in skilled servant work. And it's translated in the other translations have it as equip. And effectively what that is implying is recovered wholeness. Now, thankfully, and touch wood, this will never happen. I have never broken a bone in my body. But when you think about this idea of recovered wholeness, I want you to think about broken bone. Because when a bone is broken, and I've seen a few in my time, like right in front of me, bang. Let's get gruesome, popping out through the skin. You know, it's ugly. But what has to happen is they have to set it in such a way that it grows back. Now, it'll never be as strong, but it will grow back and it will be functionable. You can't take a story? No? One of my, I'll tell it, I'll keep it PG. One of the guys I played soccer with was a goalkeeper, and he came out to make a save, and a guy jumped at him, and he broke his leg in two places, both bones in the bottom of his leg. And when they set it in the hospital, they set it in such a way that it was only just touching. It wasn't right on properly. It was sort of like this. And so he was experiencing excruciating pain. And they wondered why. So they did an x-ray and realized what they'd done. So they had to hit it with a hammer and break it again to reset it. It's this idea of recovered wholeness. It's also this idea of discovered function. For many of us, we know what God's called us to, but we're not maybe functioning the way we should. I've dislocated several fingers playing cricket where the ball has hit the end of my finger and dislocated it. And it had a function. I knew what its function was, but it just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't do what it was meant to do. And so, you know, I don't know how you deal with dislocations here, but my cricket coach would just say, come with me. We'd go to the back behind the shed and he'd go, hey, look at that over there. Then he'd grab my finger and yank it. And it goes back into place. And it would return to its discovered function. I was able to catch again. But this is this idea, this is the picture. And I know it's a little gruesome, but when we're thinking about ministry, about being equipped, it's this idea of having a recovered wholeness or a discovered function, knowing who we are and what we're meant to do. So here's the big idea for today. The blueprint for ministry is the members of the body operating according to their correct functions. We're going to unpack this in a moment, but that's our big idea, operating in the correct functions. And let me just reiterate, it's not the role of professional Christians. It's not just our job. All of us working together is what makes for a healthy, vibrant, purposeful church. One Bible commentator said it this way: Ministry is not a professional office. Someone who ministers is administrating the life of Jesus throughout society. Ministry has to do with taking what you have and giving it in the interests of people. I love that. What a great description. It's taking what we have and giving it in the interests of other people. It's really challenging. And it makes me ask this question. What is a human life for? What is it? What's a human life for? There must be more than just the years that we live, right? There's got to be more than that. What's the old cliche? The old cliche says, it's not the years in your life, it's the life in your years. It's not the years in your life, it's the life in those years. Now, we're looking at purpose over this series of messages. And purpose is a great definition or a great short answer for what is a life? Well, it should be a life of purpose. We should be intentional about our lives. Jesus said it this way. In John 10:10, he said, I, Jesus speaking, came so that they might have real and eternal life. More and better life than they ever dreamed of. That's what Jesus offers us. Jesus offers us a life of purpose, a life of destiny. We find our purpose or our humanness most clearly when we are attached to Christ. When we are connected with Christ, that's when we realize who we really are. What is our life? It's when we're with Christ. And as we live in Him, He teaches us how to live for Him. Now, I want to pause here for a moment. And if you're here with us for the first time or maybe the second time when you're just checking things out, and you're thinking, well, okay, what's all this Jesus stuff about? Can I just say to you that it's in that connection. Jesus wants to have a relationship with you. He wants you to know His Father, God, the creator of the universe, in a personal way. He wants you to be part of the body, part of a family, which is another way that the Bible talks about being a Christian. And if for you this morning you're just thinking, man, I don't really know Christ in that personal way, in that purposeful, intimate sort of way, then could I encourage you to either come and see myself after the message or stop by the connection table and just say to someone there, hey, I'm just checking this all out. I want to know a bit more about this Jesus guy that you're telling me about. And someone there they'll be able to talk with you, pray with you. We have a Bible that we could give you. If you're watching online and you're thinking, hey, I'd be interested in that, then just click on the link, send us a message. We'll post you a Bible. We'll answer any questions you have. We would love to help you connect with Jesus. All right. So here's how we apply this. God's desire for us is that we have a purposeful life. He wants us to be part of a community that's connected to Him, like New Hope. We are one room in a huge house that God has established called the church. And we want to be healthy, vibrant, and purposeful. And so how does He do that? Well, I'm going to take a punt at something I know very little about. And my next section, which is my application for my message, I've entitled The Batter's Box. And this is a baseball thing, I believe. And so we're going to have some fun with this because I don't know very much about baseball. I went and saw the Washington Nationals play when we were in Washington once. And everyone stood up at the 7th inning and I went, what's going on? I find out that this is a tradition that they have in baseball, right? You get up and you stretch and whatever, and they have those little men with the bobbleheads running around the outside and do all this. You know, it was bizarre, but it was fun. We enjoyed it. It was good. But yeah, exactly. No clue, but it was fun. God is wanting us to be part of a body. And he wants us to be active members of that body. Not passive. He wants you and I to find the gifts that he gave us that we talked about earlier and use them to the best of your ability. Now, here at New Hope, we use a system, we affectionately call it Around the Bases. And there are a series of classes to help you grow. It's a discipleship pathway that we want people to go on. Now, for some of you, this is going to be a bit of a nostalgic tour because you've been there, you've done that, and if we had T-shirts, you'd have the T-shirt to prove it. Some people, it's a single. You hit a single and you get to 101. And that's the belonging side of things. That's the membership. That's exploring what it means to be connected to New Hope. And it's the great first step in you figuring out how you can be a part of this. For others, you've really got onto it and you've hit a double. You've made it to second. And so you've done 101, you've done 201. 201 is where we start to think about spiritual disciplines and where we want to try and help you grow. We want to try and help you grow along the way. And so we provide class that talks about reading the Word, about prayer, about journaling, about small groups. All these different things that will help you grow in your faith and help you to be an active member. For others, maybe, and I'm not sure if this really works, but you might have stolen a base or two and you found your way to 301. Or someone else has come up and they've made a hit and you've got to 301. 301 is shape. It's helping you understand who you are, your God-given spiritual gifts, your heart, your abilities, your passions, your experience, and how all of those things will equip you for ministry. They'll equip you so that you can be that active member that we talked about. But it doesn't matter where you are on that journey. It doesn't matter. Every one of us has a role to play. And like I said earlier, the health of any church is when its members are active and in ministry or serving. Paul, in the letter to the Ephesians, actually makes a very bold statement. He stresses the fact that every Christian has a responsibility to build and strengthen the church. Again, it's not just for the professional Christian. It's all of us working together. And as we spend the rest of the month of February unpacking the purposes, our goal is to be a healthy, vibrant, purposeful church. And that's been the goal from day one. And the church has grown, the church is meeting needs, and that's because we're following the strategy. The strategy that God outlined in Acts 2. We have the plan and we're working the plan that God gave us. But I just wanted to remind us all this morning that we're all in the game. Nobody's on the bench. Nobody is sitting on the bench. You're all in the game playing. No matter what you think your capability might be, there is something for you to do. You have this opportunity to be an active member. And you can say with everybody else, this is my logical ministry. This is my reasonable service. Father, thank you. Thank you that you have given us the bridge. You've helped us to see that these purposes are intertwined. God, that we don't do these things in isolation, but they're actually all connected. And they're building us towards a blueprint of ministry where we are active members, the priesthood of all believers. God, you are calling each and every one of us to be players in the game. And for some of us, we may have hit a single, we might have hit a double, we might have found our way to the third base, and we're moving towards those final stages. But God, we all have a role to play, and we're thankful for it. Thank you that you allowed us to step up to the batter's box and be in the game. God, we commit our lives to you afresh today. In our heart of hearts, we commit ourselves to active membership because we want to see a healthy, vibrant, purposeful church impacting the community, the nation, and the nations beyond here at New Hope. Amen.